Right, yeah, 13. This is just really short video tonight on dietary manipulation and carbo loading, because there's quite a bit of detail that we need to discuss in the lesson, but this is just, as usual, our basic overview. So this follows on from our ATP, energy systems work, all the things we've been doing. This is now thinking about where we get some of that fuel from to make those things happen. So, you'll have heard this before at GCSE, you'll have done bits of this last year, but we've got three primary sources of energy. So carbs, fats, and proteins. And you can see there, as you will know already, and if you don't, you need to find it out, where we get those foods from. I'm not going to say that now. You'll know that, and if you don't know where you get protein from, or you don't know where you get fats and carbs from, you need to find that out, please. So just thinking about carbohydrates, things that you need to know, and there's an awful lot in your textbook that you don't need to know. So this is very much about what you do need to know. So carbohydrates, depending on the type of athlete or activity you do, they should be around about 50 to 75% of your dietary intake. If you're an endurance athlete, it's obviously going to be higher. If you are a power athlete or an athlete who takes part in a sport that happens over a short burst of time, it's a more powerful experience, then you're going to be more down at sort of 50 to 65, something like that. But obviously endurance athletes require more, as it says there. Just so you know, this is a point, glucose is the basic usable form of carbs in the body, and glucose does come into the body in things like apples and fruit. So if you hear people say that if you're trying to eat a no carb diet, you wouldn't eat fruit. Fruit does have glucose in it, but that natural sugar in fruit is glucose. Everything else, as the carbs, when it comes into us as that glucose, it's a different product, and we'll talk about that in lesson. But any additional, as we know, the excess glucose, so the term that's here, excess glucose from unused carbs, is stored as glycogen in the liver. All right, and then that's where our glycolysis comes in, of the turning glycogen to glucose. Now that goes two ways, and you just need to be aware of that. Insulin, which I'm sure is something you've all heard of before, insulin is released when we have too much glucose in our bloodstream. So you'll know that insulin's related to people that suffer from diabetes. So when we have the body realizes or detects, that's the word I'm looking for, too much glucose in the bloodstream, it then releases insulin to turn glycogen so that we can store it. So glucose is turned into glycogen so that we can store it, as we talked about last time. Glucagon does the exact opposite. All right, so it turns glycogen to glucose for use as an energy source. So just know them two bits: insulin, glucagon, the difference between the two. And these are all primarily in the liver. That's where these conversions are taking place. If you think about fat, regardless of what type of athlete you are, what type of activity you're doing, you should be thinking about this being less than 30% of your dietary intake. Pursuing a diet that is less than 10%, or trying to get to a diet that's less than 10%, is really, really difficult. So obviously the less fat you eat, the less dangerous as some of those bad fats are getting into our body. We'll talk about the difference between good fats and bad fats in the lesson. But again, fats have to be converted into glucose to be used, and that's a long, lengthy process, which we'll touch on in the lesson, but I'm certainly not going to start to cover now. What you do need to know is excess fat is stored as adipose tissue. So if you are sat there now and thinking you've got too much fat on your belly or your arms or certain part of your body where you think you're carrying too much weight, that is adipose tissue that is there. All right. So if you think you've got whatever on your belly, whatever, it's adipose tissue. So that's where fat is stored, and we also store something called triglycerides, which are in the muscle cells. And the fuel that our muscles get from fats comes from the breakdown of that adipose tissue and those triglycerides, and we'll talk about that a little bit in the lesson. So just so that you're aware of that element of things. And then protein, which should be somewhere between 50 and 25% of our dietary intake. It is primarily for growth and repair, and we know that. So we don't actually have a store of protein. It's used to the body when it comes in, and we use that to grow our muscle cells and to repair muscle cells. So if you're a bodybuilder, someone who's trying to put big muscle mass on, you will be eating an awful lot of protein. It's an amino acid. That's it kind of how it presents. And protein's generally only used as an energy source in endurance events when all other sources have been used, and the body then starts to utilize the proteins that are within the muscles as an energy source. And it's not a great position to get to be honest. If you get into that stage where everything else is exhausted, you're in a little bit of trouble there. So protein can be used as an energy source, but it's more thinking about how we use that as a fuel to grow and repair our muscles, particularly after excessive training or a big event or something along those lines. Now, what I want to talk to you about is carbo loading, and I bet you'll have heard this phrase before. It's carbohydrate loading, and this is something that is talked around with endurance athletes, and it's something they do in preparation for a big endurance event, and this is called manipulating the diet. So we're manipulating what we eat to suit the demands of what we got. So I want you to imagine now we are all, what night is it tonight? It's Wednesday, so next Wednesday or next Thursday we are all going to run a marathon. So we've got 7 days time, and us as year 13 and me are going to run a marathon. And what we're going to do is we're going to prepare for that. Our diet's going to be prepared for that to give us the best possible chance of success. And what carbohydrate loading does, in essence, is it tricks the body into thinking it needs to store more glycogen than it does. So look at this here. What you've got here is a measurement of glycogen, all right, in the muscles. All right, this is a measurement from 0 to 150 millimole of glycogen in the muscles. These are our days along the bottom. So you might not just be able to see my screen grab. That might be better. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. So day 1 is tomorrow. Okay, and we are going to go and do some significant periods of exercise. If day 1's tomorrow, we would be looking to do a heavy session. We're talking about a 2 or 3 hour run. So because what we're doing is depleting our carbohydrate stores. It's essential that we do something excessive so that we deplete our stores. Now, normally what would happen is once you've ate a carb meal after heavy exercise, your body would store that energy, would resynthesize the things in the ATP, the systems that we use, and would store that glycogen, that glucose. What we do though is we starve our body of carbohydrates. So after we've been on that long run tomorrow, we wouldn't then eat carbohydrates for the next 3 days. So it's called carbo depleting. We starve our body of carbohydrate. And what then happens is when we start eating carbohydrates again, the body thinks that it needs to store more than it normally would, and so your body's kind of convinced that this is what needs to happen. So you'll see if this is our base level, by the end of day 5, when we've ate a high carb meal, our body has stored more glycogen than it previously did. On day 6 we would eat another high carb meal and again further store those points. Notice we're not doing any exercise at this point. And then day 7, the night before, we aren't exercising, we're again storing further muscle glycogen in the muscles, by manipulating our diet. We're eating a high carb meal after we've starved our body of carbohydrates. Now that's a fairly whistle-stop tour. It's something they've done pretty quickly, but there are a couple of bits that will come out in the exam after we start on Friday with a 9-mark question. Okay, sorry it hasn't been any entertaining. Sorry I haven't done anything that you weren't expecting. But hopefully you've got an awful lot of basic information that we can build on. When you get this question on Friday, I reckon we should be at least at 6 marks. Alright, I'll see you then.